A 1, a 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can be serious or silly when you paint with Robin and Lily. Mama's a teacher, I just write songs. Come and join along.
Hi, I'm Robin.
And I'm Lily.
And we are Robin and Lily.
For the love of painting. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
This is our March painting kit.
And we're going to be working on a little succulent in a terracotta pot. So if you are joining us with your own materials, you're going to need some watercolor paper and watercolor paints of your choosing and a brush. You're going to need a drawing pencil and 2 cups of water. One we're going to keep clean, the other we're going to use to rinse our brush. Now, if you don't want to gather all of those materials yourself or you're starting out, you can visit artbarnstudios.com/paintkits to check out our Robin and Lily paint kits. It comes with everything you need to paint along with us today,
including 2 pieces of watercolor paper, one that is blank and ready for you to use, and the other that has starter lines for each month's particular drawing. This is a small succulent, and these are our starter lines. So if you order a kit, you'll get what we have, and you can paint or actually draw from the beginning right along with us. If you're confident in your drawing skills and you don't need starter lines, then your kit does include a postcard that also has images step by step, 1, 2, 3, 4, to get you through the entire painting, including the drawing process.
Okay, so I think we're ready to start. Where do we begin, Mom?
Okay, so we're going to start again with our starter lines. If you are starting on a blank piece of paper, you can kind of catch up. What I have here are my center petals of my succulent with the main little petal in the middle. And each of these points will become petals as well. And we're going to have petals around the top. And this is our little pot, our little flower pot at the bottom. So one thing that's really awesome about drawing flowers, and these succulents in particular, are the layers. How layering those petals gives you an opportunity to play with shadow and highlight and foreground and background. So really what we're going to be doing with each petal that we draw is just thinking about where it falls and how it's layered among the others. And then we'll begin painting, and I'm going to tell you all about our particular palette when we get there. So let's start drawing. We have, I'll call this 4 tiny petals in the middle. Let's go ahead and right at the top, we're going to draw a petal that's pointing upward. So you always want to start on the line and just draw. And then when you stop at that line, and that gives you that appearance that what you've just drawn is behind the petals that are layered above it. Let's do another one. We'll do a small one here to the right. Now your petals do not have to be exactly where mine are or exactly where Lily's are. They don't have to be the same size or the same shape exactly. Just imagine that your succulent is its own little plant. It would grow differently and look differently than any one that we had in our home. And as artists and individuals, each of our expressions are always different and unique. So don't try and be exactly like us and get frustrated. Just give yourself freedom and license to create something unique. All right, and again, another larger petal, much like that one. Up and to the right. And these succulents are quite pointed at the end of each little petal. Okay. Now, I have a point here. So I'm going to create the rest of my petal to join it, just like that. And again, if your shape turns out differently, that is completely fine. And I'm actually going to draw a tiny little petal right on top of that one. Again, creating layers. Much like on the right, I'm kind of going to mirror that on the left, but not exactly. I'm going to draw a large petal to the left. lines can start and stop at any point. It certainly does not have to be exactly like mine. Let's go to the front. Now when things come forward, that's called foreshortening. So even though the petals are coming toward you in the drawing, sometimes they kind of look shorter than they really are. That's the foreshortening part. We're going to take these 2 points and just extend our lines back to the rest of the petals. Any size, any shape, any curve is completely fine. If you're drawing without starter lines, again, just start in the center, and as you layer, as you go out, you'll be layering each petal. Some are small, some are large, and you can make that up as you go along. Each of these points is the end of a petal. So I'm just going to start here and pull back. It's going to be kind of a large, round one. Exactly the same thing on the right side. That turned out awesome. Okay, so again, just notice how the petals layer one on top of the other. This curve is the bottom of the upper lip of the pot. The top edge of the pot is under the leaves. We're not even going to draw the top edge of that pot because it's hiding up under those petals. But we are going to connect the sides. We want to come in about this far. You can make a little dot on either side. And we're going to connect this dot to the bottom, curved bottom of the pot. So straight lines, just as straight as you can naturally draw. They don't have to be perfect. Simple and beautiful.
Already starting to come to life.
So one of the amazing magical things about learning a new skill on video is that you can stop and pause and take a break and come back, or rewind and watch it again. So this would be a great place to pause, take a look at your drawing, and look for connecting all of those points and lines. And what we end up with is a pretty simple drawing.
Absolutely. And so if you're following along with our step-by-step card, this is the end of step 1. You did it. Only 3 more to go.
Yep. All right.
Let's paint.
All right, so let's take a look at the watercolor paints that we're using. These are 8mm tubes of Winsor and Newton colors. And today I've chosen Alizarin Crimson, Cerulean Blue, Cadmium Yellow, and Burnt Sienna, which are all gorgeous colors. And we're going to start today with a little Cerulean Blue. The upper part of our succulent is a light blue, and the lower petals turn a greenish blue. We'll be using a little bit of each of these colors in the background in a very loose wet on wet painting style. And then the Burnt Sienna is for the Terracotta Pot. All right, so let's get started. We're going to take a little water. I'm going to use this glass for rinsing and cleaning my brush, and this smaller one for just loading my clean brush with water. We oftentimes will put clean water onto the paper when we want to paint wet on wet paper. So you always need a resource for clean water throughout the painting. Rinse in one cup and paint with water from the other. So first, let's put a few drops on our Cerulean Blue and let that begin to dissolve. The more water, the lighter the color. And while that's kind of dissolving and soaking in, I'm going to rinse my brush. And we're going to start with wet on wet. So what we're going to do, we're going to paint plain water on several of our petals and then drop some of that cerulean blue in there and let it kind of just flow within the wetness of the paper. So you can start really anywhere that you choose across the top and fill in, just like coloring in the lines. Even though this is plain water, you want to paint in the lines. So choose 1 or 2 petals I'm going to suggest that you skip a petal, leave one dry in the middle. Let's do 2 for now and leave a dry petal in the middle. If we get both petals side by side wet, all of those colors will bleed together. So to keep our colors a little bit separate with each petal, we're going to paint 2 petals wet with water and leave a dry one in the middle. Okay, you can let that soak in for a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and load my brush with some of this cerulean blue. And I'm just going to drop a few drops of the blue and let it bleed out into the water. Now, I'm putting more blue on the inside part of the leaves, closer to the center, and leaving more water towards the point of each petal so that it's a darker color as it goes down under the layers. And we'll even highlight that a little bit more later when we add more color. But I am being conscious to drop my blue really close to what would be the underside of those petals, or yes, petals. I keep wanting to call them leaves, but they're petals. Now this was wet on wet because our wet paint dripped into and painted into the wet water on the paper. I'm also going to show you the wet on dry technique, which is simply a wet brush on dry paper. I'm going to use more of my cerulean blue, kind of a more intense, deeper color, a little bit less water. I'm going to paint this center petal because it's really the darkest point on my flower. And again, there's no water, and you can see the difference. What a deeper, deeper blue that is when I paint directly onto the dry paper. All right, so we're going to keep painting in this way. And as we go down towards the bottom, we're going to start adding some of our green. Actually, we have to create our green, which is a good, let's go ahead and do that. So we have that to work with. So we're going to drop some clean water. Let me clean my brush. Clean water onto the cadmium yellow. And really let that soak in and pick up a lot of the color. I'm going to use the center of my palette. So I'm going to pull some of that yellow over into the center. Then I'm going to rinse my brush and pick up some of my blue. And I'm going to mix that right in with the yellow here in the center. If you put more blue, you'll have a darker, bluer green. If you put less blue and you have a heavier bit of yellow, then it will be a lighter or more yellow green. So I'm going to go ahead and start painting with my green. Again, in the areas of my petals that are up closest to the other petals where they're going underneath, that's where it's going to be the darker green. I am painting wet on dry, and you can go back and forth. You can try both techniques. You can choose just one. And as I paint out toward the point of my petal, I'm going to use less green and more water so that it's a lighter pigment. And this is a better example than the blue of how the darker green is going under the petals to show that layering and shadowing effect. So we're going to give you a chance to just take your time painting through each petal. You can, if you want to follow our theme of color, the blue is going to be mostly on top and the greens are going to be mostly at the bottom, and they're going to bleed and blend a little bit. So you have some blue greens. Take your time and bounce around on your succulent so that your petals aren't all wet at the same time. If you really want to stop and dry it, sometimes we'll stop and use a blow dryer and dry it quickly and then get right back to work. So let's go. Okay, so we paused for just a moment to let our paintings dry. Now that the paper is dry and the pigment is dry, we can paint back into that at any point in any place, and we're not going to have continued bleeding of the colors unless you plan for that. And some of that we will. Clearly, where a lot of my yellow and green and blue bled together and mixed while it was still wet, I planned for that. I wanted those colors to move and bleed and blend together. Now we're going to switch gears for just a moment, and we're going to work on the background. And this is going to be completely wet on wet and really a free flow of color and pigment in the background. You're not going to control it very much. You're going to let it do its own thing and kind of make a little bit of an abstract painting in the background. So
I'm very excited for that.
Yeah, this is some of the most fun you can have with watercolor. All right, so make sure your brush is really clean. And then we're going to dip it into our clean water. And we're literally going to paint along the edge of our petals and even along the edge, almost all the way around. I'm going to put most of my color that's floating in the background across the top, to the right, down the right side and underneath. But I'm not really going to go all the way around completely on every edge, but you can put yours just about anywhere you choose. So I'm going to paint with clean water all along the edge, and then I'm going to bring that water out probably about this far, if you can see where I'm putting just the shiny wet water. So I'm going to paint neatly along the crisp edge with plain water, and then fill that in so that there's a pretty good sized area of wet paper. You can actually go all the way to the edge of your paper if you choose. And even if the pigment and the color doesn't bleed that far, you can give it that option. When I first started learning to watercolor paint many years ago, one of the things that fascinated me the most was this idea of painting with clean water. It never had occurred to me until I learned about it in school.
Yeah, I would say it never had occurred to me until I learned about it starting these videos.
Oh, really? You didn't even know before this?
Yeah, I really never used the technique. But I mean, the only thing I had ever learned about watercolor came from you through being homeschooled. I never actually took a watercolor class in like an academic setting or even just of my own accord. Yeah.
So if you can see the shiny wetness of the paper, you can see that I've come very close to the edge all the way around. And then I'm pulling the water out in 1/2 inch to 1 inch all the way out into the whiteness of the paper. So while that water is soaking into the paper just a little bit, I'm going to get more clean water on my brush and put a drop of water on each of my colors. I'm going to use, well, actually, I'm not going to use burnt sienna in the background. So let's just make sure our alizarin crimson is nice and wet, and our cerulean blue and our cadmium yellow. Now, in general, if you mix the 3 primary colors, blue, red, and yellow, you're going to get brown. And not usually a pretty brown, usually kind of a muddy brown, depending upon the different hue, the different pigment, the different type of paint that you're using. Now, it's okay to let it bleed and mix and get a little bit of that brownish or maroonish looking color, but for the most part, we're not going to blend all 3 of them on purpose. But let's let a little bit of the cerulean and the alizarin crimson bleed together, and a little bit of the cadmium yellow and the cerulean bleed together. And of course, we already have an example of those colors together, the cadmium yellow and the cerulean blue, and it's a gorgeous green. I'm really loving these colors. And I could frame Lily's palette, it's so pretty. Okay, so almost like an abstract painting, we're gonna drop color, move it around a little bit, and let it bleed and blend together, and just let it do its own thing.
Okay. So I can use any color anywhere There's no...
Yes, no boundaries. I'm going to start with Alizarin Crimson really close to my petals and let it just move. Isn't that beautiful?
It's like fireworks.
Oh yeah, that's a great analogy. Ooh, look, you can even make it. Ooh, fireworks. I love it. So I'm going to do a little, we could talk about balance in a drawing and a painting. And typically you like to use a little of the same color all around your composition, and that creates balance. So clearly I dropped in my Alizarin Crimson at the top. I'm going to come down here and do the same thing at the bottom to create a little bit of balance.
Wow, I love that. That's just beautiful.
It is beautiful. This is so much fun. Oh, and I'm so excited for Cerulean Blue and Alizarin Crimson together. I know that it's going to be a beautiful violet. And there it is. Beautiful color. Wow, that changes the painting tremendously. Now here's some of that brown I was talking about, where all three of my primary colors have blended together just a bit at the bottom. You can see it's an orangish or dark greenish or even brownish color, but I like it. It gives a little bit of that earth tone that I feel like we kind of need in this earthy plant painting. Now see, you don't have those earthy colors yet, but I actually like it with those bright primary colors. I like it both ways.
I do like it both ways. It's really cool because, I mean, up close the earthy tone is actually, I feel like it's going to look even better with the terracotta pot once we do that. But then from a distance, you can't even tell what the color is. It just looks like shadow around the back of the pot and some sort of, you know, somewhere where it's sitting.
It's
other
gorgeous.
beautiful colors around it.
Now here's the thing about being so playful and free and letting watercolor move and do its own thing. There is a point at which you have to stop. You don't want it to get too muddy. So it's really just a matter of judgment. At some point you need to say, okay, it's beautiful. It's going to keep moving and changing as it dries and as it bleeds in more deeply into the paper. So at some point you just have to stop. I think I'm going to stop.
I'm not there yet. So if you are not done yet either, continue painting along with me. I'm just going to go back and keep dotting colors that I want to see bleed together. That's the entire thought process behind me choosing.
You know what I'm noticing?
Colors.
Yours looks like one of your acrylic paintings.
Well, I can't help it.
No, but it's beautiful.
It's just how...
If you haven't seen Lily's acrylic abstract paintings, you need to look those up on our website. Where would they go exactly? Art Barn Studios?
artbarnstudios.com/Lily's Paintings, I believe. But if you go to our homepage and then studio
you'll
in the
find
barn,
her portfolio.
you'll find it.
But you'll notice that her very large acrylic style abstract paintings have this color scheme, really, in a lot of them, and a very similar feel. I love it.
I adore bright colors. Okay, just a little more alizarin, and then I will also be done. Bold. Gotta keep it bold right there.
Oh, I love it.
Boom.
I love it. I like yours better than mine.
No, don't say that.
I always say
No.
Okay, it's just the variety, I think. I'm just drawn
That's
to
right.
the variety. Okay, so let's look at our succulent again while we're letting our background dry. Now, we might actually pause and go and blow dry these or give them time to dry just like that. I'm loving these colors.
Me too.
Loving these colors. But now we want to look at finishing painting the actual succulent, and we want it to pop away from that background. It's a beautiful background, but we want to make sure that the edges of our petals are crisp And you can either make your color bolder so that it stands out against the background, or leave a little white edge, where I can see here Lily actually has left some white, and that white edge acts as a reflection, kind of like a bit of a reflection of light, and it allows the petal to come forward and separate from the background a little bit, which is important. Now you can see too, I'm going to use my pencil as a pointer. So I've left some pure white paper showing through. When you paint with watercolor, there is no actual white. You can use something called a white gouache, which is an opaque or sort of a solid white for touch-ups or corrections or that sort of thing. But mostly in watercolor painting, you use the white of the paper to create any white in the image. So here where I've left white paper and where Lily has left, I love these white edges. You're going to want to leave some of those.
Yeah.
So that, again, it's like that reflection of light on the edge of the petal. One thing we really want to look for, and I'm going to use my pencil again to point this out, is where we're going to add deeper, darker color as shadow to give a three-dimensional quality. Where every petal falls behind another is where that shadow is going to lay. So on this petal, for example, if you make it darker right up to the edge of the other petals, that shadow is what would be down deep inside the succulent where there's less light. So each time one petal overlaps another, there's going to be some darker color, a little bit of shadow. Same thing on this edge where there's green and blue, and you could use more of the cerulean or more of your green, either way, but you're going to make sure that there's a darker bit of color along the edges where each petal overlaps another one. Even up here in the front, these are going to be darker here. And each time you come toward the edge or the point of each petal, you want your color to lighten or even have some white paper showing through. And so we'll work on shadow and highlight here in the succulent. We'll let that dry, and then we'll work on our terracotta pot.
All right.
All right, let's do it. Okay, these are looking so beautiful, and I love these colors, the blues and the greens and the succulent. Okay, so now we're going to paint the terracotta pot, and we're going to use this burnt sienna. So make sure your brush is nice and clean. Pick up some plain water and drip that on your burnt sienna, and let's hydrate that a bit. Oh, and look at that beautiful color. There it is. It's the perfect color for a terracotta pot. So let's talk about where the shadows and highlights are going to be. Just as we talked about layering the petals and shadows on each petal as it falls beneath another, the same effect is going to happen here. Under each petal, there's going to be a bit of a shadow and a darker, richer burnt sienna color. Also, along the bottom of this lip, there's going to be a bit of a shadow there. Near the bottom, we'll have a bit of a shadow. And on each side, all the way down, as that color, as the light fades into shadow, as the pot curves around to the back, that's how you create that three-dimensional quality. So where the light reflects or where the rounded pot comes forward toward you will be a bit of a lighter, more watered down burnt sienna color. And then as that color fades or deepens around the edges, it'll be darker. So let's work on that. Oh, and before I begin, I want to address wet on dry or wet on wet. Hard question at this point. If you want the burnt sienna to really sort of bleed and move in a free-form way like your background, you can paint wet on wet. I think because I want my color to have a bit of contrast with the playfulness of the background, I'm going to paint my terracotta pot wet on dry.
I think I'm going to start wet on dry, and then when I really want the paint to get loose in the middle where it's going to be lightest, then I'll just add a lot of water and let the water move the paint as it will. But starting with the edge wet on dry, I think that will dry faster, and then even if you do layer it with other techniques, at least that will still be your darkest point.
And you definitely have more control when you're painting wet on dry. Now my leaves happen to be dry at the bottom. Make sure your leaves are dry, because as you begin to paint that terracotta color or burnt sienna up close to those edges, it will bleed right into your leaves if they're wet.
Okay, it's happened to me again. Just the faintest bit of burnt sienna blend into my leaf, but I'm going to leave it because at that point it kind of just looks like a reflection a little bit. I'm going to pretend that some of that orange color is bouncing onto the leaf.
Right. You can even balance that with a few dots of the orange up in the shadowy areas. If you want to bring that warmth of the burnt sienna, you can bring that up into your shadows a little bit as the leaves create shadow. So Lily's serendipity here, I kind of did move with that idea, and I took some of my burnt sienna and I'm going in and I'm dropping little bits of it into the deepest shadowy parts of the succulent petals. I really like it. It brings some of that warmth up into the coolness of those petals. Oh, I like it. I like that warmth.
we're almost done.
I do. I'm feeling like I'm pretty close to finished. I'm going to add a tiny bit of cerulean blue to the shadows under these most forward petals. So a little bit of blue right into that burnt sienna of the Terracotta Pot.
You know what I'm noticing is we talk about balance all the time. I really, now that all is said and done, love how bright your yellows are in some of your petals. This balances the orange and the terracotta really well, and now I feel like I need to add some more yellow to some of my bottom petals.
Well, you're right.
To
It
kind
would
of even
pull
that
this
out.
yellow and this yellow,
Yeah.
and just a few drops of it in here would create balance. That's awesome. Another thing you can do with a brush is use it in watercolor paint, much like an eraser. Not completely, you'll never erase anything completely, but you can pick up moisture and you can pick up pigment with a dry brush. I'm going to dry my brush. I'm going to go back in where I dropped in some of this cerulean blue and pick some of that back up. Ooh, I really like what that did. Okay, I'm feeling pretty close to finished here. How are you doing? Ooh, see, yours is brighter than mine. I glance over and it's like, oh, which one? So beautiful.
All right, I think I'm at that point where I really just need to stop playing with it. It is what it is, and it is beautiful.
The only thing I did that I haven't mentioned out loud is I also brought some of my burnt sienna down into my playful abstract color at the bottom, almost like a bit of a shadow where it really helps that pot sit down onto something. So I'm adding a little bit of that across the bottom and out into my color.
And you know what I've been missing since my abstract has dried is that really bold alizarin crimson.
Ooh.
So I think I'm going to go back and do the same thing, but actually with alizarin crimson.
That's
instead.
a very good idea. All right, I think I'm going to stop. I'm going to let Lily finish, and I'm just going to stop because I'm afraid I'm going to overwork it, which is so easy to do, and I really like it the way it is. Oh, see that's beautiful. Yes. Oh, now maybe I have to go back and add some. No, I'm not.
Eventually
I'm going to stop.
Eventually we're going to stop.
I do love the alizarin crimson. One of my favorite watercolor colors.
I agree. Okay.
Wow, Lily, it's gorgeous.
I'm done. Get sloppy at the end too. It's okay. I love it.
Yep.
This is absolutely beautiful.
That last little bit of alizarin crimson really gave it that last little punch that it needed.
This has been so much fun.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. We always do. Come back every month. Paint with us. Let's see, what's next month?
Next month is a daffodil?
Yes. A beautiful yellow daffodil for April. So come back and join us. Let us know if you have any suggestions or comments. And
again, for more information on our paint kits, visit artbarnstudios.com. Find us on Facebook, again, Art Barn Studios. If you want to check out more of life on the art farm and less of our business side, check out the Art Farm 636.
That's right. And Instagram.
We're everywhere. Facebook, Instagram. That's right. We're trying to get as many platforms as we can. And we'd love for you guys to join us on our journey. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.